Hey everybody, my name is Ryan Glass, and I'll be instructing this course on Adobe Premiere Pro. Adobe Premiere Pro is the leading software in the video editing industry for a reason. It's a powerful and robust tool. It will be cumbersome, time-consuming, and frustrating at first, but I promise you, once you find the rhythm, shortcuts, and general layout, you'll be editing fantastic videos in no time. I started out my video editing career just like you. I knew nothing about Premiere Pro. I learned Adobe Premiere Pro through an instructional online course. Since then, I've used Adobe Premiere Pro every single day for over 3 years and now train and teach others how to use the software. This is a beginner level course. I will assume you've never opened the software before. It will be a linear training. I'll go step by step through my editing process so you can see what a typical edit is like. I'll go through how to set up a workspace, organize your clips. I'll help you understand commonly used tools and basic editing skills. We'll cover transitions and effects along with graphics and text. You'll learn custom animations and speed ramping. I'll show you audio effects and color correction, finally wrapping up with exporting and sharing your video. Are you ready to learn Adobe Premiere Pro? Let's get started. In this course, I encourage you to follow along with me in real time so you get a good feel for the movements, key commands, shortcuts, and overall workflow in Premiere Pro. So let's begin by opening up Adobe Premiere Pro. Once it loads, a welcome screen will pop up. Yours might look different than mine, and that's okay. The welcome screen will list your most recent projects, so if you've never used Adobe Premiere Pro, it's probably blank. To open up a new project, press File, New, Project, or just click New Project on the welcome screen. Here you'll list a title for the project and choose where to save it. We'll cover media and project organization in the next lesson, but for now don't worry about anything else on this page. Just FYI, before starting your editing in Premiere Pro, make sure your graphics driver is up to date. This will affect how your video is played back and rendered. If you are editing and noticing a lot of lagging or delays in the program, it's probably a graphic driver issue. You'll then be directed into what we call the workspace, and my workspace might look different from yours. That's okay. That's the point. It's easy to customize and change your workspace. This is my favorite and go-to customized workspace template. It works well with my overall workflow. Let's practice customizing your workspace. For starters, you can click and drag any window around in the workspace to have it where you want. You can stack windows in the same window to create tabs. If you go up here to Window, you'll be able to view all the possible windows in Adobe Premiere Pro. The ones with the check marks are in your workspace already. Make sure to have a lot of the ones I have checked in yours. These are the most commonly used windows. Once you get the windows in your workspace in a layout that you like, make sure to save it so you don't need to customize it every time you open up the program. You can create as many workspaces as you want to fit different kind of projects or edits. Now that your workspace is set up, it's time to import and organize your media into the project. We'll cover that in the next lesson. Now that your workspace is set up, let's import some media. There are several different ways to import into a project. You can go to File, Import, and select the files you want. You can double-click in the project window to import as well. Or you can simply click and drag the files into the project window. That's the method I typically do. Importing is when you select and upload media, such as video, audio, and images, into the project. Here's a pro tip that will save you a lot of time and headaches down the road. Organize your content. I don't care how you do it, just stay organized. Establish a workflow that works best for you and stick to it. You should have a folder for every project you do with separate folders for video, audio, and images. It makes the importing process much easier because all you have to do is drag that folder into the project and it keeps it all organized for you. When you import a folder into the project, it creates what we call a bin. You can create additional bins like this. Think of bins as folders. There are different ways to organize your media once it's in the project. You can do it through a list view, which helps you organize by different metadata and specifications, or you can list by thumbnails. You can also select Sort by List View in the thumbnail view to get the best of both. That's what I typically do. So now that we have our media imported, how do we start editing? We first must create a sequence. Your sequence will sit in the timeline window, which is where all the edits happen and where you build your video. So, create a new sequence. You can do that by double-clicking the timeline window or by doing this. Now, don't get too overwhelmed by this part. For most of you, you will be working with digital SLR 24 frames per second. This is a standard video structure used in most videos you see. However, you can search for the specific type of camera you use, the resolution such as 4K, and different frames per second. Don't worry about all this though. DSLR 24 frames per second works just fine. If you have any doubts or concerns, you can always just pull a media clip into the timeline and a sequence will automatically be created with the same settings. So now that you have a sequence created, let's start the editing process. We'll cover that in the next lesson. This lesson will cover basic editing. Something to keep in mind is there is a difference between the source window and the program window. The source window previews clips that you've imported into your project. The program window previews your sequence or timeline. I make this clarification because I often cut and do trimming, edits, and so forth in the source window before putting it into the sequence to make for a cleaner edit. You'll see what I mean in a second. So let's say you want to import this clip. You double-click it to preview it in the source window. You can scrub to quickly see the flow of the video. I recommend turning on audio scrubbing in your preferences if you plan to work with a lot of audio. It might be annoying to hear the audio scrub from time to time, but it helps immensely. Okay, so let's say you only want part of this clip, which is oftentimes the case. You don't need to import the entire clip into the sequence. You can simply place in and out points and it will pull that specific section out of the clip. Let me show you. To place an in point, press I or do this. Determine an out point then, or press O. Now, you can import the entire clip or separate it by audio and video. If you have background music, let's say, and there's no dialogue needed in the video, you can import just the video like so. Same thing goes for audio. Now that your clip is in the timeline, you can start the edit. But before we begin, let me show you how the timeline functions. If you import a clip and it isn't scaled properly, which happens a lot, right-click and select Set to Frame Size. It will autocorrect the scaling. The timeline has several different tracks, different ones for video and audio. You can create as many tracks for each as you'd like. To create a new track, right-click and select this. Think of tracks like stacks of paper. The track that sits on top is a track that shows. So you can have several different tracks on top of each other, but only the top will show. Keep this in mind when working in the timeline. Some tools in the timeline include the Snap tool, which aligns the media end to end perfectly, and the Link tool, which keeps the audio and video linked together. You can turn these on and off as you please. You can lock tracks so they're disabled from editing, and you can also hide tracks to see what's below them. Here's how you expand a track to make them larger or smaller. You can also use the plus or minus key to zoom, or press Z on the keyboard and click to use the zoom tool. Great, now you know how a timeline works. In the next lesson, we'll cover the essential tools you'll use while editing. In this lesson, we'll cover editing tools. Learning and understanding the tools is a key to quick, effective, and strong video editing. The tool window is right here, and this is where you'll find tools that allow you to cut and splice footage, slow and speed up video, move and select clips, add text, and so forth. Start by learning the basic keyboard shortcuts for most of the used tools. It will speed up your editing immensely. Let's get started in the timeline. Remember, the timeline is where you build and edit your video. Once your media is in the timeline, you can fine-tune the timing and cut with the selection tool, like so. You can also use the razor tool, or C, to splice the footage. Another useful tool is to speed or slow down the clip with the rate tool. This keeps the clip's content and in and out points, but speeds or slows it down depending on which way you drag it. You can also adjust the speed by right-clicking and selecting speed and duration. These tools allow you to shift big chunks of media together, either forward or backwards. You can hold down on a click to see additional tools. The tools I use the most are the razor, selection, and rate tool. I also use the text tool a fair amount, but we'll cover text and graphics later. Tools are meant to be tools and help speed up your editing process. You don't need to use all of them. Just find ones that work for your editing workflow. In the next lesson, we'll cover video effects. In this lesson, we'll cover effects. So what are the effects you can apply in Adobe Premiere Pro? The answer is complicated because there's a lot. Go to the effects window. Let's focus on video effects for now since we're working with video clips. Click Video Effects and go through all the different effects to familiarize yourself. I suggest making a favorites folder and dragging the ones you like or commonly use into that folder to quickly find them. Here are my favorites. To get started, choose an effect to test. I'll choose Gaussian Blur, which is a commonly used one. Drag the effect onto the desired clip. Next, select the clip in the timeline and go to the Effect Controls window. Here you can adjust the level, strength, or whatever is offered by that effect to minimize or maximize the effect. Go through and test out different effects to get a feel for what each one does. Some ones that are included in most clips are things like position and scaling. You can adjust the values for these like so. Now that's how to do effects. In a later lesson, we'll cover how to customize animations with effects. But for now, let's move on to transitions. This lesson will cover transitions. Under the Effects tab is where you'll find video transitions. The most commonly used ones are cross dissolve, dip to black or dip to white, and cross zoom. To place a transition into the timeline, it needs to be placed either before, after, or in between two clips. You can shorten or lengthen the effect like so. You can also control the transitions in Effect Controls. Go through all the transitions and see which ones you like. Some of them are a little corny, and some of them are very useful. See what works for you and put them in the favorites folder. That's transitions. It's pretty easy. Next, we'll move on to text and graphics. In this lesson, we'll cover text and graphics. Perhaps you want to add a title or text to your video. You can simply click T or select the text tool to put in a title or text into your project. Another way to add titles is to use the Essential Graphics window. Here you'll find templates and commonly used title frames. I edit the text in the Essential Graphics window, but you can also edit the text in the Effect Controls window. To edit the text, click the text box in the timeline and go to the Essential Graphics window. You can align and transform your text, change the font and color, put a stroke or shadow on it, and so forth. That's how to get text on the screen. Now, how do we move the text or move things within our project? How do we animate? In the next lesson, I'm going to show you how to customize your animations. In this lesson, we'll cover how to customize animations. An animation is moving something from point A to point B. So think about time when you're thinking about animations. You animate in Effect Controls. Select the clip that you want to animate in the timeline. Then go to Effect Controls. Effect Controls has its own timeline. Click the arrow if you don't see it. To start an animation, you need to put a keyframe into the Effect Controls timeline. To do that, select this. This is the beginning point of the motion. It saves the value. So, think about time, how it will move from that point to point B. Then, move forward and change the position to where you want it to end. This will create a new keyframe. This creates a path motion. If you want something to stay still, you need to copy point A to where you want it to start moving. Understanding how keyframes work is essential to moving from a beginner in Premiere Pro to a more advanced user. A keyframe is how you animate a property or effect over time. You can use keyframes for any kind of media or any kind of effect. Let me show you an example. If you want to move the text we just created across the screen, you first need to select a keyframe where you want it to start. It doesn't even need to start on the screen. You can have it move off the screen and then move on. To do that, move the sliders to the position where you want the clip to end on. Keep in mind that the timing matters with the keyframe. To get a smoother or slower effect, you can place multiple keyframes to do multiple movements. If you want the clip to stay still and then move again, you'll need to copy the keyframe for the amount of time you want it to hold. Now, you can do keyframes with pretty much any effect in Effect Controls, and it all works the same way. The next lesson will go over color correction. The final step of my editing process typically involves color correction. It's not always necessary, but it makes for an overall better edit and production. Premiere Pro calls their color correction window Lumetri color. It's an effect, but it's also in a window. Here, you can adjust things like exposure, contrast, brightness, saturation. You can use the Lumetri scopes to get a feel for where your colors are. You can control color correction in Effect Controls as well. Color grading and color correction is definitely a more advanced tool. If you are looking to learn more about color correction, stay tuned for a more advanced lesson. In the next lesson, we'll cover audio. So now that you have a feel for video, let's move to audio. You can add music or MP3 files in the audio section of the timeline. You can also move dialogue or audio from video clips without importing the video as well, as we discussed in an earlier lesson. To do that, in the source window, make sure to select only the audio button when you drag. Audio can be tough to gauge sometimes. To get a proper read of your levels, make sure to use the audio meter window. Generally, green to yellow is good. If your audio is hitting red, you need to do some improvements. If the audio is damaged or needs improvements, go to the Essential Sound window. I typically label my background music as such and apply that effect. It makes the sound more manageable. If you have dialogue, click that setting and balance out the sound. You can remove noise and do other effects to help boost the quality of the sound. Audio also has effects, but I hardly use them. If you are interested in using them, go to the audio effects to see which ones might suit you. Now that your video is built, how do we save and export it? Well, we'll cover that in the last lesson. In this final lesson, I'll cover how to export and render your content. Depending on your driver, you can render your content as you go. The red bar means that it's having trouble rendering. The green bar means it's been rendered. To render content, simply click the Enter bar with the clip selected. You can also go to Sequence, Render. When you're ready to save and export the project, go to File, Export, Media with the sequence selected. Make sure to select the right format, file location, title, saving location, and entire sequence. Make sure to select the right format. This is the one I typically use. Choose the file location or where you're going to save it and title it. And just like that, boom, you've learned Adobe Premiere Pro basics. I hope this course was helpful and at least got your feet wet in the software. Stay patient and keep practicing in Adobe Premiere Pro. You're not going to master it overnight, but the more you use it, and the more you get comfortable, the better video editor you'll be. Thanks for taking this course on Adobe Premiere Pro.